304. I won't even go back through to recap what we've talked about. I highly suggest you, as the listener, watcher, reader, whatever, go check them out because they're fun and interesting. And there's way too much content in this world anyway. But if you find this intriguing, I encourage you to go look at it. The last topic that I wanted to just kind of quickly address, and this mostly comes to the table due to the current market of the last year, is this idea of controlling the C market. And this virtue that we follow blindly, it seems, in attaching the price of coffee to either specialty or commodity. Even though we know that the price in the market is commodity, we still attach specialty and differentials to it. And why? Essentially, why it's a messed up system, and why we even follow it with blind obedience. And I know this is like a huge topic, obviously, from whether it's talking about the history to it. To the why, but specifically right now, in today, we've seen the highest historical price of the C price for coffee, and we're seeing interesting shifts in the industry because of it. But yeah, I guess like I don't know, hit on this idea of why maybe the idea of following it to any degree has long-term negative ramifications for everyone, but specifically farmers.
Well, I guess following it, I don't know what's going to happen with it if it keeps going up for no reason. Maybe that will be the great thing for farmers. It also may destroy the rest of the industry. But I can say what I've learned about the impact it's had so far. I mean, I guess there's this like, it's another thing to get into, but there's like this very strong intuition that markets are efficient in the neoliberal world, especially considering high finance, and like because that's the only economics that you get taught in schools in North America, at least anymore. Most of South America too, unfortunately. There is this financial market, there's this derivative, there's the coffee future. That's what people use to hedge coffee. So, of course, it represents supply and demand, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, well, I think that really should not be taken for granted. That's an assumption. If there were a perfectly efficient market, then that should be the case. But is it? I mean, and this is where I think like the way the industry gossip, especially like the coffee finance gossip goes these days, gets really like troublingly dogmatic. Like every time anything happens, like anytime the price moves, there's always an event that it can be tied to after the fact, and that can all be justified within the paradigm of efficient markets, by creative reasoning. You can come up with a formula that
the frost in Brazil, a flood in this country, whatever.
Yeah, so first it was EUDR, so the deforestation requirements in the EU. All the coffee is going to have to be compliant, or you can't import it. So then the coffee price went up. Started going up. Then it's because of that, because everybody's hoarding coffee, everybody's like trying to fill up their warehouses really quickly with uncompliant coffee, because then they're going to have to comply afterwards. So that's why the price is going up, right? Supply and demand makes sense. Then they said, all right, no more UDR. It's going to be at least a year, maybe never. But what happens? The price go back down to where it was before that, because nobody really needed to buy that much coffee anyway, and that there's not actually a shortage anymore. No, kept going up. So then, all right, it's the weather in Brazil. It's a bad harvest. Is like the weather's looking pretty bad. The flour is not so good. There's a drought while the cherries are maturing, so it's going to be bad. Price goes straight up. Then, all right, actually, the previous season has had the highest Brazil exports since ever. So what happened? Does the price go back down because the harvest wasn't actually destroyed? No, keeps going up. Ah, well, it was weather in Vietnam. That's what it was. I mean, there actually was bad weather in Vietnam. Their harvest was affected. But of course, Vietnam produces mostly, like, I think 99% Robusta coffee. So this is
Right.
not tenderable on the C market. And as a matter
Right.
of fact, the vast majority of the coffee Brazil produces is also not tenderable on the C market. So this logic that the market is inevitably efficient really falls apart quickly. And we realize that you can just reason anything to justify the price moving, that then the price moves, and then, I mean, supply and demand conditions react to the price versus that happening the other way around, as it would, so it's supposed to theoretically. In, the neoclassical economics, data markets are efficient, which is this type of economics that justifies having this hegemonic price indicator in the first place, about having this
Yeah.
centralized market, because it makes it more efficient, because the centralized one is going to be more efficient than any other one, has the most liquidity, and the more information is going in and affecting all the, well, the information affects the decisions people make. All of their decisions are reflected in one place. That means it's going to adjust quickly, and the price will adjust to make sure that all demand is satisfied and all supply is destroyed, or is shipped or purchased.
Right.
But this becomes then the default, and then anything can happen around this, and it just becomes, reason somehow that it fits
Yeah,
into
you
this
could just
paradigm.
popcorn and cherry pick different reasons, and if it doesn't actually turn out that way, like you were using the Brazil as the example, like, well, the export was actually pretty high. It's like, so, I mean, because it kind of reminds me of what's happening going on right now. It's like, Trump can say something stupid, and the market does something like it. Maybe but then it seems like, who has the power to even suggest that, say that, and or then dictate what the meaning is? Like, where does that meaning even derive from? Like, other than people in power who have a voice? Like, I don't.
Yeah, this also gets interesting. And to finish the story of where we've come, I got a little off track about where we are. But if you look at the last 35 years, like since the 1990s, since 1990, that's the start year I've used for all these studies, since the International Coffee Agreement,
Agreement, yeah.
the export quota system was finished. So only mild Arabica can be tendered against the C contract. That's the only one you can actually, like, if you hedge using the C contract for whatever coffee, and then you say, you know what, I'm actually going to buy it, or I'm actually going to sell it on the C market, it has to be washed Arabica. It's the only type that you can actually sell there. You cannot sell a hard Arabica there. And you cannot sell Robusta there. Robusta has its own contract on the London exchange. Hard Arabica does not. It's only in the Brazil exchange, but this is not widely used. But what's interesting is that the real price, the real C price in purchasing power terms, has been falling steadily. Not steadily, but if we look at the long-term trend, it's downward. And I mean, even until recently, in nominal terms, the actual dollar amount had been trending downward for 30 years. So you would think, well, yeah, but it's because there's oversupply, because people are planting all this coffee. There's so much coffee in Brazil, so much coffee in Vietnam. So it had to go down because there's an oversupply, but not of the same type of coffee. Mild Arabica coffee production has not increased since 1990. It's fallen somewhat, small margin, but basically it's constant. So within the efficient market paradigm, the only reason that the price should fall when the supply is the same is if the demand is also falling. But I mean, one, the population of the world has increased a lot since 1990, and two, specialty coffee has become a thing, has become a big part, like at least 20% of all consumption. A little bit before 1990, but mostly after 1990. So I mean, I find it highly unlikely that there is the demand for mild Arabica coffee, or like what I would say good tasting coffee, sorry Robusta bros, has fallen in the last 30 years. So yeah, so something weird going on here. So I mean, basically, the study that I did, it makes a big econometric model to try to figure out what are the fundamental factors, what are the supply demand factors that actually affect the C price.
Right.
And I mean, it's not published yet again, but basically, it's non-tenderable coffee. It's not the same type of coffee that is actually defined by the exchange, because the exchange only remains relevant to the physical market when you can hand it over physically, when you can arbitrage, because like if it's not a competitive price, you can get a better price somewhere else, then you just sell it somewhere else. But in this case, of course, like very, very, very small amount of coffee is actually sent to the C market. So it doesn't really matter if it diverges from what people are paying for it and needing to get paid for it in the real world. But as long as everyone is hedging, as long as all the buyers are hedging based on it, they must also pay for their coffee. They must also price their coffee based on it, or else the hedge doesn't work.
Right.
Like because you're trying to cancel out the transaction you're making,
Right.
and you're not going to hedge oil. You're not going to use the oil contract to hedge coffee, because then when you go to buy the coffee and you sell your oil, it doesn't necessarily work. And this was what happened with coffee. But as long as, I mean, why do we use it? Because there's a critical mass of people transacting coffee that want to keep using it, and therefore, like, you can't just say, you know what, I'm out. Even the country of Colombia tried to get out of it in 2019. They said, you know what, no more C market. We control like 20% of the mild Arabica in the world, or maybe it was more. I don't remember. And they said, now we're out of this. They couldn't, because all the buyers were pretty happy with how it was going and said, you know what, see ya. We're going to Honduras. We're going to New Guinea. We're going to Tanzania. We're going to Peru. Whatever. So eventually they acquiesced and said, you know what, we tried. We're still on it. So as long as that critical mass says this is the rules of the game, they continue to be the rules.
Wow. I mean, I'm presuming that's a little different, like, because I know Ethiopia operates on its own accord to a degree, right? Like, are they somewhat separate off that because of how they funnel their exports internally, or?
I mean, yeah, they determine what are the prices going to be. They have, I guess, because it's done in a centralized way, it's more of a political process. But still, I mean, another thing is that the coffee that they make, at least their specialty coffee is so different that it's hard to replace on people's menu. But I mean, that's also a pretty small amount. So most of the coffee that's being exported from Ethiopia isn't going to in like a single origin specialty package. It's still commodity coffee. So in this sense, they're still influenced by this, because the buyers could just go to another country.
Yeah.
And the same way that specialty coffee is still influenced by this, because we're like, so if you have commodity coffee and you have specialty coffee, if you're a farmer and you're making specialty coffee and the commodity buyer says, you know what, do a lot less work and I'll pay you the same, of course they're going to do it. Do less work, take less risk, spend less time waiting, and get paid. So yeah, go ahead. And then of course, what does specialty say? Usually, all right, how much more do I have to pay than the commodity buyer to get this? Not like, well, what is the the objective value of this thing that I should pay? It's, I mean, again, capital is going to reproduce itself. You can say we're not doing it as much as we could, but that's how it goes. So I mean, as long as that there's still that critical mass that sticks behind this price convention, and that this is of course a social process. It's in our minds that this thing has meaning. But as long as every morning we get up and we keep agreeing that it's important, and enough people refuse to do business in another way, then everybody has to keep doing it that way. But of course, we could all wake up tomorrow and think about it in a much different way and say, you know what? This thing doesn't even track the commodity that it says it's supposed to be about. We should do something totally different. We definitely could. Because again, like going back to where we're talking about power, it's about having options. And if you don't like somebody's offer that's based on the C market, and there are no other options because all the other offers out there are also based on the C market, well, there's nothing you can do about it. But until that day where a farmer or a co-op calls up the importers and they say, what's pricing looking like today? And they say, no, you know what? I'm going with those other guys doing things a different way who are not using this reference. Then there's no reason to keep going. I mean, this stuff is not natural. This stuff was not produced through like a geological process or evolution of a species. This was made at some point, and then whoever has the balance of power looks out, and they say, what's the best that I can do for myself today? Or like, how can I make this work better? Or how can I make my boss happy this quarter? And it's just like thousands of people doing that for 40 years. And then eventually this stuff creeps and it starts to favor the people with more power to dictate how it should work. I don't think there's any conspiracy behind it. It's just like everybody, taking advantage of the circumstances that they have, making it work a little bit better for themselves every year over many decades, and then you end up with something really problematic.
Right. Yeah, that's an entire system and structure. Well, take that for what you want, folks. Just know how complicated it is to buy coffee, and I think the cool takeaway there is like, coffee or not, it's important to challenge ourselves to wake up daily and challenge ideas, concept structures that hopefully aren't exclusively in favor of ourselves, but for those around us. And I think a lot of that comes down to ultimately like worldviews. If you think of yourself as an individual who's valued higher because you have a particular religion or actually see humanity as interconnected, that alone will, I think, dictate a lot of how you operate in the world, unfortunately. But Karl, thanks, man. I really appreciate the time, and look forward to seeing how people can hopefully learn a little bit more and make better purchasing decisions across the board.
Yeah, me too. My apologies if you get canceled for this.
Get mad. Get mad, Priest Coffee.